Hello all, this is day 2 of the Phil 1204 Knowledge and Reality course. So we're still dealing with the foundational materials of what philosophy consists in, and as I've already noted, philosophy primarily consists in providing arguments. It's more of a method than it is any comprehensive doctrine. So um, the overriding sort of principle that's common to all forms of philosophy is just the use of arguments. And by argument, of course, we mean a certain sort of logical structure. So this lecture will substitute for 2 days worth of content. If you notice on the syllabus, rather than having a distinct reading for the third day, we'll just do this twice because I think it's that important. I'll also post some auxiliary material for you in case you want to do that. I highly recommend it. It'll be useful for you being able to use these sorts of concepts in real time. So with that in mind, we'll move on. So an argument consists of premises which are intended to support a conclusion. Premises are statements, and by statement I mean something that is either, it can possibly be either true or false, a certain sort of sentence, right? So you might contrast this with where is the dog? Is this in and of itself true or false? Take a minute and think about it. No, it's not, right? Where is the dog? It might be true that the dog is in the room or the dog is not in the room, but where is the dog isn't itself true or false. It's a question. So the same might go with some other sort of sentence like shut the door, right? That's not true or false either. So premises have to be of a certain special form. They're propositions, they're indicative sentences, they're assertoric. You're asserting something about the state of affairs of the world. And so these are examples of not statements. An example of a statement would be any sort of commonsensical thing you might think of. Grass is blue. Well, that's not commonsensical, but the point is that it's either true or false. So this is asserting that grass is blue. Commonsensically, you would just say, no, grass is green. So this sentence is false. What you mean is grass is green. And that sentence is true. Those are both statements. So when people provide arguments, an argument should never have in its premises a question or in its conclusion a rhetorical question. So that's really common for people to, at the end of some point that they were trying to develop, say, well, isn't it obvious that X? And in that sense, that's a rhetorical question, right? So it's not in fact a statement. You may be implying a statement, but it's not itself a statement, and what we're going for is statements. So that'll be something that's important to keep in mind throughout. So an argument is a combination of statements intended to support a conclusion. That's already been said. So just keep that in mind. So an example is just this case. It's out of the book. I rearranged it and broke it down a little bit more because Vaughn doesn't do it in this single case. He does it with a number of other cases, and I recommend you do that on your own, but I'm not going to expect you to listen to me doing that for you for an hour, so I'll just do it in this one instance. So this one example is the world of stocks and bonds is in for a rough ride because the stock market has tanked. Brokers are skittish, and the Dow is the lowest it's been in 10 years. So if I were to break this into an argument, I would do it as follows. I would say the stock market has tanked brokers are skittish, the Dow's is the lowest it's been in 10 years, therefore the world of stocks and bonds is in for a rough ride. So if you were to write a paper on this topic, this would probably be an economics paper, not a philosophy paper. One thing that you'd have to establish is why you would think these sorts of things, first of all, why they're true, and after you've established why they're true, you need to give some sense of why they would lead to this conclusion. How do they support the conclusion that the stock and bond trade will be bad for a while? So yeah, I don't need to go into why that might be the case in this instance, but just in principle, so that's what a paper would consist of, right? So this is the very basic outline, and you could, the topic sentence of each one of your paragraphs could say something to this effect. The stock market has tanked. Evidence for this is the fact that the Dow Jones went from 14,500 in 2001 to 8,000 by 2003, or whatever the precise number was. Brokers are skittish. You can track various patterns, and then, right, so this is probably not necessary. So judging arguments. So the previous argument that we just addressed was not deductively certain. So for one thing, all of these premises could be true, and it could still be false that the world of stocks and bonds is in for a rough ride, right? So that statement could be false. So all of these other things could be the case, and it could still be the case that the stock market does amazingly and it has a smooth upward trajectory, right? So it's not a certain sort of argument. And those certain arguments are the best sort. So if you can make that standard, that's the holy grail, you've done a good job. So in judging arguments, there's either two general forms of arguments. There's inductive or deductive. That previous argument was inductive, and so I'll cover deductive for now, and then we'll go back to inductive. So a deductive argument is an argument in which the conclusion is intended to follow necessarily. So I say supposed to because it's quite possible that an argument that intends to be deductive fails, in fact, to establish its conclusion. So not all arguments succeed as the idea, but they can still be considered deductive in form, although they're just invalid. So along those lines, so a valid argument is an argument that if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true as well. So take this as an example. If the sky is green, then it is brown. The sky is green, therefore the sky is brown. So the first thing you'll think is like, what? This is nonsense. And you're right, it is. But the important thing about the notion of validity is a structural feature. It's a matter of the relationship between the parts of an argument and how they relate in terms of producing a certain conclusion. So just for the sake of argument, if you assume that the premises are true, the conclusion must be true, that's what it is to be valid. So it has nothing to do with whether or not the premises are actually true. It just has to do with the relationship between the parts. So you'll sometimes see this sort of thing formalized. I think I referenced this once before, right? So if P then Q, P, what follows, right? Q. And this is the same variety of argument. You can see it filled out. But any time in which you see this sort of argument, it's going to be valid. And I promise I will get more creative with my examples of logically valid arguments in the future. So this is one of the most key terms around. I promise that this will come up again. I'll hold you to that. So be expecting to know what validity is and to be able to define it and to be able to identify cases of valid arguments and invalid arguments. And all right. So you know what? The other thing I was going to do here, and this is for the people actually watching the video. So the other key one, soundness. Not sure. So soundness, think of it as validity plus. Valid and the premises are true. So first of all, it has the feature that it has the proper structural relationship, right? Where if the premises are true, then the conclusion must follow. And even better, the premises are actually true. So what does that entail? That entails that any sound argument will have a true conclusion. That's just what it means to be sound. It will have all true premises, it will be valid, and it will have a true conclusion. So in your own arguments, you're looking to create sound arguments. So here's a sound argument, or at least I think so. You can prove me wrong. So Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. So in this instance, it seems pretty uncontroversial, or Socrates was a man, if that's getting you. All men are mortal, all men as in all humans. That seems pretty incontrovertible. And if Socrates is a man and all men are mortal, it does just follow that Socrates is immortal. That's the validity feature. And lo and behold, it does seem that it's true, right? Socrates drank the hemlock and died. He's immortal. He is amortal, not immortal. So these two are key to your success. Being able to identify them in real time in actual instances will be something you'll be expected to be able to do. So if you want any more help on this, I'm always available. But we'll move on to inductive arguments now. So inductions are cases in which premises are supposed to provide probable support for the conclusion. So notice the key difference here is probable, right? So in the other case, in deduction, it's necessary. So it just is the case that the conclusion follows from the premises if the premises are true. But induction, like that example of the stock market, no matter how likely or how much you expect the premises to be true, there's still the possibility that the conclusion could be false. So even, for example, we'll get to this later in the semester, even if in the past you've seen the sunrise every day for however many thousands of days you've been alive, saying that the sun will rise tomorrow is just a sampling. It's just an inductive inference from past experience. So although it's very likely that the sun will rise tomorrow, it's not certain. And that's the important difference with induction. And I mean, for the most part, it's pretty hard to be certain. Most of the sciences use induction, and they do quite well. So this isn't a terrible shame. But the standard is still, we're trying to do deductive arguments if possible, and inductive arguments if deduction just won't work. So there are various forms of inductive arguments. So there are inductively strong arguments. An inductively strong argument, like it sounds, is the premises provide probable support for the conclusion. So the difference between these two, this might seem like a repetition, is that this induction here just says supposed to, right? So it may not actually. So there are weak inductions which don't actually support the conclusion. A strong induction is a case in which the premises actually provide probable support. So you might think of some sort of sampling, so I've experienced every single jelly bean in the world, and I know that 80% of them are licorice. So if I grab a handful of jelly beans at any given time that are randomly distributed, then then roughly 80% of them will be licorice flavored, right? And so that's inductively strong because of my sample size is sufficient to warrant the conclusion. I've experienced all the jelly beans. That's what I was saying. So differently, inductive weakness is where the premises fail to provide this sort of probable support for the conclusion. So this is actually a case of strong induction. So we'll get rid of this for now. So a weak case might be, I don't know, I've met 5 Laotians. All of them liked hockey. So all Laotians like hockey. Right. So this is inductively weak, we would think, because this is an insufficient body of evidence to make any sort of inference, any sort of generalization about an entire group, right? So if you think about it visually, you might think that this is just a very small few samples out of a massive pool of individuals, so it's not sufficient evidence to warrant the conclusion. So just a general way to think about induction is that induction is generally a matter of sample size. So I guess what science in large part tries to do is it tries to isolate variables, but it also tries to get sufficient samples to justify the sorts of inferences that we want to make. So that's one of the things that you can look for in induction. So for now, we'll just leave it at deduction and induction. I was going to go into inference to the best explanation, but I think that's an entirely distinct domain that might be a bit complicated for now, and I won't expect you to be responsible for that information. It's a somewhat intuitive idea, inference to the best explanation that is, but for now we'll leave it as it is. So make sure to do those additional exercises just for your own well-being, and I'll see you guys next time.